my first big tip is not to fall off stage while you're holding a cup of hot tea in front of a large crowd, because it shatters your cool. Like, no matter how badass you're trying to look, grabbing the mic and stuff, and throwing tea everywhere, throwing tea on the front row like Shamu the whale, SeaWorld, is just a bad move. Not only that, I don't know if anyone noticed, but my 9-inch nails pin had gone right through my jacket and my t-shirt. So when I came off, I was going to do this Fonzie thing where I pulled off my jacket. So my biggest tip about writing, the simplest thing that I know, is never to sit down to write a short story, or a novel, or a screenplay, or a comic book. Just sit down to write one good scene. That's it. Just don't think I have 200 pages of this left to go, because you don't. Your only job is to write one scene that people will actually give a shit about. Don't write a scene where a guy gets up in the morning and brushes his teeth and fixes his breakfast and thinks about his lousy life. If he opens the fridge to get, the milk for the cereal and there's a head in there, then you've got a scene. But until then, you've just got something that no one really wants to read, and you're writing out of some weird sense of obligation, maybe just to get your pages for that day. You focus on writing one exciting scene, and you get that done, preferably in one sitting. That's the right size for a scene, most scenes. And then the next day, you write another great scene. And when you have a large stack of great scenes, it's a novel. And that's pretty much the basic approach, I think. And all other approaches I would be suspect of. Yeah, over there.
In your latest book, at the end, you write that you changed the ending.
Yeah. We're not going to have any spoilers, right? Because I'm sure some people haven't read the ending.
Well, would you care to embellish what the original ending was?
Spoiler, then I know that's not how it ends now.
I'll just say it was as frothy and light as the rest of the book. I do want to say something about the title, which I didn't get out when I introduced the book. It is this vanity license plate, and there was a lot of discussion about whether we could risk that title, because it's weird. It's like Q184. Or whatever, the Murakami book, and when they were having the first meetings about the book, someone at William Morrow, my publisher, said, "So what is number 42A?" And so it's a little bit of a tricky title. I live in New Hampshire, where 1 out of 3 cars has a vanity license plate, and I can't tell you how many accidents I've nearly been in because I was punched over trying to figure out what that shit in front of me said. The best one I ever saw was like CTHGUD, and I was convinced for a little while it was Cthulhu God. Yes! And then I realized it was See the Good. But the book is full of puzzles, and wordplay, and I wanted the title to sort of make you stop and go, what is that? And I mean, I work in comics, and in comics they believe that getting people to stop and look at the cover is half the battle. This is why, a theory was generated in the 50s that you could raise sales by 50% if you stuck a monkey on the cover. Monkeys were proven to boost sales for, at least temporarily. Having a little wordplay puzzle is kind of like putting a monkey on the cover, I thought, or something. I don't know. I just make this shit up as I go along. None of what I just said is true. Go ahead.
Do you have any recommendations for horror markets for short fiction? Because I feel like there's a lot of established science fiction ones, but not so much horror that I can find. It's like Cemetery Dance, Nightmare, but I'm not finding a lot other than that.
This is my answer. There's 2 things. First of all, I'm mostly clueless because I've been out of the loop for a really long time. There are a lot of things about breaking in nowadays that I have no idea how I would approach. When I started writing and publishing, I was very insecure, tremendously insecure. That was why I dropped my last name. When I decided to write as Joe Hill instead of Joseph King, my reasoning was I was afraid someone would publish a mediocre piece of work because they'd see a chance to make a buck in the last name. And I didn't want that to happen to me. I needed to know what I was doing was good, and that when it got published for the right reasons, because someone loved it, not because someone was impressed with my family. And so I was able to remain anonymous for about 10 years. Even my agent didn't know anything about my family. And I saw a lot of rejection, which hurt at the time, but in retrospect I feel was good. You know, I spent 3 years on this fantasy novel that I was sure would sell, and it was turned down by every publisher in New York and every publisher in England, and for an extra kick in the pants, it was shot down in Canada. You know, insult to injury, talk about lemon juice right in the eye. And at the time, that was very painful, but in retrospect, I feel that was the pen name doing its job. The book didn't sell because it wasn't good enough. I still had things to learn about economy, about developing the idea quickly, about characterization, about dialogue, so that those rejections were good things, not bad things. But I'm coming to this, so I'm coming a long way around to saying I needed approval. I needed an editor to say, I love this story for this story, not because of anything about you. That desperately mattered to me. And I eventually got it selling weird stories, horror stories, and stories of the strange and the fantastic, largely to literary magazines like the High Plains Literary Review and the Clackamas Review. I had some success publishing in fantasy and horror magazines abroad. So several of my short stories were published in England by the Third Alternative and Crime Wave, and I think a magazine called Black Static, Postscripts and stuff. And all that has changed. So much has changed in the last 10 years. You know, now a lot of people, you know, get a story just right and then they e-publish it. And I don't think I ever would have been comfortable doing that because my need for approval was too high. And I would have just felt like if I was self-publishing, I was cheating. I needed an editor to say, I'm going to work with you to make this story great, we're going to publish it, and I'm going to pay you $75. That was important. That $75, the money didn't matter. What mattered was what someone was saying about my work. But maybe for another writer, you know, you get something really sharp and you feel it's good, and your friends and their friends are reading it saying this is awesome. Maybe you publish as an ebook for 99 cents or something. I don't know. I would look at anthologies, and I would remember that this is a great time for magic. That fantasy is just, a story is fantasy if you're trying to sell it to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, but if you're going to a magazine like the High Plains Literary Review, you just call it magic realism, and they're like, oh, that's great, you know? So there's plenty of room to shill your genre fiction to literary markets which still exist. You know, just remember to use the highfalutin terms. You're jumping, I got it. Go ahead, you're jumping. Yeah, jumping. Go ahead.
I'm a bit nervous and insecure.
Don't be nervous.
About this question.
Yeah.
As always, my curiosity overrides everything.
Good for you.
What's your opinion on film adaptations and novels?
What's my opinion on film adaptations and novels? I actually have a book that's being adapted to film, that has been adapted to film. My second novel is a book called Horns. It's about a decent, generous young guy, very naive young guy named Ig Parrish. Ig's girlfriend, Marin, is grotesquely murdered. And in Ig's small town, most people think he's the dude who killed her. Even though there's not a lot of evidence to prove that. So he's very isolated and demonized. And he gets drunk one night, goes out on a bender, and he curses God. And when he wakes up the next morning, he's growing a pair of horns out of his temples. And with that comes all the powers of the devil. And he decides to turn these powers towards the task of finding out who really killed his beloved. That was filmed last fall by a Frenchman named Alexandre Aja, who directed a very beautiful and shocking horror film called High Tension. It stars Daniel Radcliffe as Ig Parrish and Juno Temple as Marin Williams. I have not seen the full film yet. I've just seen footage. What I have seen is very beautiful, very painterly. You really get a sense of a summer in decay, the last days of the summer, folding into September and fall. And it was filmed by the guy who directed The Ice Storm, and not directed, filmed The Ice Storm, which I thought was the most beautiful American film of the last decade. So there's really painterly look to the film, and the clips that I've seen struck me as being very emotionally powerful and effective. I don't know if the film will be good or not. We'll have to see. I thought that Daniel Radcliffe was terrific in The Woman in Black. I thought that was the best, most shocking, most satisfying horror film in the last 5 years. And I do think it's Radcliffe's best film, as much as I love the Harry Potter pictures. So I have hopes lightning might strike twice. I feel like there's something satisfying about seeing Harry Potter battle his inner Voldemort. So that's good. I gotta add one other thing about the film, which is that the internet ruins everything. We all know this. There is a thing on IMDb that says the picture will be out October 14th. This fact was produced, I assume, by a 13-year-old noob sitting in his basement. It was like, I want to see this picture now, and it should come out this fall. and he just uploaded some information. And so now what's going to happen is, like, the film is probably going to come out next April, and someone's going to be like, Entertainment Press is going to be like, the beleaguered film is 6 months overdue, all because some dude who knew nothing, no one factually connected with the picture has said this is when it's coming out, but it's out there, it's on the internet, on a database, suddenly it's fact, and now whenever the film is released, safe to assume it will be, delayed because of catastrophic creative problems, or at least that's how people will read it, so. But there is no release date for the film. We don't know when it's coming out. They would talk about doing the Toronto Film Festival and some other stuff, so they're still editing and throwing in CGI effects and stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
You took one of your short stories, The Cape, and turned it into graphic form. Do you have any plans for others like that?
Right. One of my short stories is a story about, it's called The Cape. It's the heartwarming story of a young man who has his child's cape and discovers he can fly with it, and the warm and responsible decisions he makes once he has this power to fly. It was adapted as a comic. I actually didn't script it. It was scripted by a young comic book writer named Jason Chiramella, with art from Zach Howard, and then Jason and Zach went on and did a second series called The Cape 69, and I consulted with them on that, and we worked together, but in a lot of ways that's Jason's baby. And Jason is adapting another of my short stories, which is called Thumbprint, and he's doing that as a 3-issue comic, and that's a story about Abu Ghraib. And has a real nice, it has, the artist they found is a guy who kind of looks like he's doing the kind of work that David Mazzucchelli was doing in Batman Year One. So hopefully people will like it. I'm a little bit careful about what I let go out there, because there's some things just because writers are weird and stuff, and so I'll say, no, I don't want that one, but maybe this one, and so. We'll see. I should add that I am doing another comic that has nothing to do with Lock and Key, and does have to do with one of my stories. This fall there'll be a comic called Wraith, which is a story of Christmasland, and features Charlie Manx in it, a story set in about 1990. And none of the other characters from Nosferatu are in it, and it isn't necessary to have read Nosferatu to enjoy the comic, and it isn't necessary to read the comic too, because I hate when people do that. I hate when people, like, there's a lot of talk about transmedia, which means like you get like 1/3 the story in the book, 1/3 in the comic, and 1/3 in the video game, and it like 100% sucks. When I do a book, I think the whole story ought to be there. That's what you paid for. And I don't want to see things chopped up in like some weird, unsatisfying form. Nevertheless, there are a lot of ideas in Nosferatu and a lot of characters and landscapes and things going on. And I thought it would be fun to do like my sleazy 1970s horror film, set in Christmasland. And I see a way to do that, where it's a totally different story that just happens to use some of the ideas and settings in that one character, Charles Manx. No, the art is going to be done by Charles Wilson III, who does a series called Stuff of Legends. Now, I'm wary of trying people's patience by talking too long, but I know that there are some more questions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shift into the speed round. I'm going to continue to answer questions. I'm just going to do it faster. Go ahead. Go ahead, yeah. Both of you had your hands raised. Then she timidly lowered her. I assume she wants to know. Were you going to tell me who commands the navies, the British Navy's navy?
I was just wondering if you're working on a novel now.
Yes. Go ahead.
What specific musicians did you have in mind when creating Judas Coin?
Been asked that several times, and I still haven't worked out a satisfying answer. I think he has Lemmy's hair. Go ahead. Yeah, you.
How many drafts of Heart-Shaped Box did you write?
I believe it was 5. And I generally do between 5 and 7. Yeah, way back there?
Ramsey Campbell said that nausea does not equal horror. What do you consider good horror?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not going to be able to speed answer that one. You know, I love horror fiction. I love dark fantasy. You know, I love all that stuff. Sometimes, you know, sometimes the genre falls down because the people who are practicing it forget what it's all about. You know, I loved a lot of the slasher films in the 80s. I had fun with them, but they're not very good horror. The torture porn stuff in the late 90s and early aughts is not very good horror. You know, if you look at those slasher films in the 80s, you know, you get a cast of characters: the slut, the jock, the geek, the stoner, the good girl. Yeah. You know, and you see them, and they're just bowling pins to be knocked down by Freddy Krueger. You know, they don't have any depth to them. The characters that have the most personality are the killers. You know, it's Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, and so you wind up laughing as they cut people down, and enjoying the kills. And I find that sort of morally abhorrent, actually. I don't want to root for the bad guys. I want to root for the good guys. To me, horror describes that feeling that comes over you when you care about someone and you see them facing the worst. When you see someone facing, you know, a whole lot of darkness and trying to find their way out. So for horror to work, you have to give readers or an audience characters they can love and identify with, characters with a rich inner emotional life, characters with weird obsessions and fixations, a history and regrets and attachments, and a habit of making interesting decisions, unexpected choices, and all these things add up to what feels like real life. And then you put those people, you put those heroes in a box, and you force them to punch their way out, and the reader is with them and caring for them. And I think that that's a very humane emotion, a very good emotion. And I think that a lot of literary writers from the 19th century who practiced horror would agree with me. You know, I'm thinking about guys like Charles Dickens, you know, and all his ghost stories. You know, so I think, you know, I think that horror, what horror means, horror is not nausea mostly. It could be sometimes, you know, if you're watching someone, you know, if you're watching a war movie and you see a character you care about slipping through guts, you might feel nauseated. It could still be effective horror. I guess I don't completely agree with him. Yeah.
Are there any plans on making a series of novels other than just like standalone novels?
Well, every book casts a shadow on the next one. You know, there's a little bit of that. You know, there are some things in Nosferatu that look back on Horns. There's some things in Horns that look back on Heart-Shaped Box. But I've already done a series of books, and that's Lock and Key. Each Lock and Key, that's my continuing, you know, that's my Travis McGee, is Lock and Key. Yeah, go ahead.
Any, not to open wounds, but any chance of the pilot for Lock and Key being available or released? Or?
Lock and Key was filmed as a pilot by Fox. It was directed by Mark Romanek. It had a wonderful Grand Slam home run script from Josh Friedman. The series is now going into its second hit season in my imagination. In real life, Fox passed it over because it was too dark and too scary, and so they went on to make something light and frothy. They created The Following.
Yeah, that's real life.
So that's a little bit disappointing, and there are no plans for anything to happen with the pilot. However, the creative team behind the pilot, Alex Kurtzman, Bob Orkai, and Josh Friedman, have all been legally cleared to work on a film of Lock and Key for Universal. So we didn't get a TV series. We might get a film. We'll have to see. I gotta add one other thing. Did you guys know, like, that Joss Whedon's real name is Joe Hill?
Really?
This is not bullshit. You can check Wikipedia on it. I think we're all learning a valuable lesson here about Fox and dudes named Joe Hill. You know, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, go ahead, you, Boston Cat.
Like a lot of people, I'm sure I really enjoyed in Nosferatu the little references to things like Dark Tower and Pennywise, and even Dr. Sleep.
Yeah.
That hasn't even come out yet.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I know what it is, so I, you know.
Should we expect to see Joe Hill referring to Stephen King and Stephen King referring to Joe Hill? I mean,
So let's go back to the pen name for a minute. At first, under the pen name, I wrote the kind of stories I thought you were supposed to write if you wanted to get in the New Yorker. You know, stories about like adultery and difficult parents trying to connect with their difficult children. And just thinking about those stories puts my soul to sleep. You know, they were so boring. But at a certain point, I had this realization that Joe Hill might as well be Joe Schmo. And if I wanted to write horror and dark fantasy, I could. And no one would connect me to my dad. I think if I was writing as Joseph King, I never would have had the courage. But as Joe Hill, I could do what I want, so I wanted, and so I did. And I started writing, and that was the stuff I loved to read. So maybe it's not a real surprise that once I started to write it, I started to sell stories and have fun. Still, I think because of owning my insecurities with my short stories and Heart-Shaped Box and Horns and the comic book, you know, it's not hard to see my dad's influence on him. You know, my dad is one of my best friends, and I'm a huge Stephen King fan. So you can see his influence, but at the same time, I was very, very careful to create my own space and not to overtly, you know, point at him. You know, but you know, I've had a bunch of books and comics, and I'm 40. You know, and I love my dad's work. And so with Nosferatu, you know, I kind of wanted the book to be like my senior thesis on horror. And that means it had to, in some way, address my dad's work. And so I decided, fuck it, maybe instead of avoiding it, I'll go right at it. And so I do a lot of Stephen King goofing in the book, and it was really fun, you know? It seemed like accepting something instead of running from something. I kind of like that, it felt good. I'll do like one more question, and then I should probably sign books. And everyone looks so nice, and you guys are like, I feel like I'm gonna pick him right back there.
what are some horror films that you really like, or that you like to get the recognition of the
What are some horror films that I really liked that I didn't think got the recognition? Well, my favorite horror film is a foreign thing called The Devil's Backbone, which is Guillermo del Toro's second or third film, I think. It is like the darkest, scariest Harry Potter picture ever made. You know, so that's fun. It's a bit dated, but The Changeling is pretty great. That's a good one. I really liked Mama. Mama was a lot of fun. I like those kids. Those kids are cool. Hey, you know, I got to tell you, it amazes me that anyone will come to one of these events because there's so many funny cat videos on YouTube. And there's like Iron Man playing down the street and Star Trek and stuff, and yet Powell's keeps holding these kind of events in the brave hope that people still care about words on paper. And you guys keep coming out, you know, or other people who care, have an interest in other writers. And I just think that's so fucking awesome. You know, my deepest thanks to Powell's for hosting me tonight, and my deepest thanks to you for being interested in the stories and coming on out to hear a guy run his yob about a book. You guys are wonderful. I'm gonna go ahead and sit down and sign stuff.
He's a plumber. He's a plumber.